Blood stained the morning dew as the war cry echoed across the Valley of Bones. She was a female Homo habilis named Zara, her hands gripping a stone-tipped spear as she watched her world burn. Behind her, the screams of the dying mixed with the roar of flames consuming everything her people had built. The rival clan had come at dawn, their faces painted with mud and ash, their weapons thirsting for territorial conquest. What had once been sacred hunting grounds was now a battlefield where brother fought brother, where survival meant the complete annihilation of the other. This wasn't just war. This was the birth of human savagery itself. The valley that had known peace for countless seasons now witnessed something that would echo through the ages, the first great genocide in human history. When the sun set today, only one clan would remain standing. But victory would come at a price that would haunt the survivors forever, leaving scars that would be passed down through blood and bone to every generation that followed. The Whispering Valley had earned its name from the gentle winds that carried the scent of abundant game through its stone corridors and flowering meadows. For 7 generations, the Earthwalker clan had called this paradise home. Their caves honeycombed the eastern cliffs like ancient sanctuaries blessed by the spirits themselves. Zara pressed her palm against the painted handprint on the cave wall, her grandmother's mark, made when she was barely old enough to hold ochre between her fingers. The ancient symbols told stories of harmony, of seasons when the herds ran thick as rivers, when the trees bore fruit year-round, when death came only to the old and the foolish. Those days were ending. "They're still out there," whispered Kale, her hunting partner, as he peered through the narrow cave entrance. His scarred face bore testament to the morning's first skirmish. A ragged gash across his left cheek where a bloodstone warrior's spear had nearly taken his eye. Beyond their refuge, the valley floor stretched like a green carpet dotted with crystal streams and groves of nut-bearing trees. But something had changed in the past moon. The game trails showed fresh marks, not just the familiar tracks of deer and wild boar, but the distinctive footprints of the Bloodstone clan, their traditional enemies from the western mountains. "How many did you count?" Zara asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Too many." Cal's voice carried the weight of inevitable doom. "At least 40 warriors, maybe more. They've brought their entire hunting force." The Bloodstone clan had always been the shadow that darkened the edges of their world, where the Earthwalkers honored the spirits of prey and took only what they needed. The Bloodstones were raiders who consumed everything in their path like a plague of locusts. Their very name came from their practice of painting their weapons with the blood of their enemies before battle. Why now? Zara muttered, but she already knew the answer. The great drought that had ravaged the western mountains for 3 seasons had finally driven the Bloodstones from their ancestral territory. They hadn't come to share the valley's abundance. They had come to claim it entirely. A child's scream shattered the morning silence, followed by the distinctive war whoops of Bloodstone raiders. Zara grabbed her spear and rushed to the cave mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. In the meadow below, she witnessed a scene that would be burned into her memory forever. A group of Bloodstone warriors had cornered 3 Earthwalker children who had been gathering berries near the stream. The smallest, barely 4 seasons old, cowered behind his older siblings as the raiders circled them like wolves toying with wounded prey. The lead warrior, a massive brute whose body was covered in ritual scars, raised his club high above the children's heads. But this wasn't going to be a quick death. The Bloodstones believed that consuming the terror of their enemies made them stronger. They would make the children's final moments last as long as possible. "We have to help them," Kale said, but his voice carried no conviction. They were outnumbered 20 to 1, and any attempt at rescue would only add their names to the growing list of the dead. "Wait," Zara whispered, her tactical mind racing through possibilities. "Look at how they're positioned. They expect us to charge down in a blind rage. But there's another way." The scarred warrior was beginning his ritual now, chanting in the guttural tongue of his people, while he traced patterns in the air above the terrified children. Each gesture was precise, ceremonial. This wasn't just murder. It was a religious sacrament that would bind the victim's life force to their killers forever. But rituals took time, and time was something Zara could use. She pointed to a narrow ledge that wound around the cliff face like a stone serpent. That path leads directly above them. If we can reach the overhang without being seen... A boulder drop, Cale breathed, understanding immediately. But if we miss, if even one of them escapes... Then we die fighting instead of die hiding, Zara finished. But those children... They're our future. Without them, the clan dies anyway. As they prepared to begin their desperate gambit, a new sound drifted across the valley, the deep, resonant horn blast that served as the Bloodstone war signal. It was answered immediately by similar calls from the northern ridge, the southern pass, and the eastern approach. Zara's blood turned to ice water as she realized a horrible truth. This hadn't been a raid or even a territorial incursion. This was a coordinated military campaign designed to surround and annihilate every living member of the Earthwalker clan. They were completely surrounded, outnumbered, and outmaneuvered. The real war was about to begin. The attack came from all sides simultaneously, a coordinated assault that spoke of careful planning and ruthless efficiency. Zara pressed herself against the cliff face as Bloodstone warriors poured into the valley like a dark tide, their painted faces twisted with battle fury and territorial hunger. From her precarious position on the narrow ledge, she could see the full scope of the invasion. This wasn't the desperate raid of a starving clan. This was systematic extermination carried out with military precision. The Bloodstone war chief, a giant named Grimgor, whose body bore the ritual scars of 50 kills, stood on the valley's central ridge like a dark monument to human savagery. His voice boomed across the battlefield as he shouted orders in the harsh consonants of his people as war tongue. Take the caves, block every escape. Let none of the tree worshippers live to see another dawn. Below, the three children huddled together as their captors prepared for the final ritual. But their terror was nothing compared to the horror unfolding throughout the valley as Earthwalker families were dragged from their homes and butchered in full view of their neighbors. Now, Zara whispered to Cale, and together they began inching along the treacherous ledge toward the overhang that would position them directly above the child killers. Each step was an agony of careful balance and suppressed fear. One loose stone, one moment of vertigo, and they would plummet to their deaths while the children they hoped to save were murdered below. The ledge was barely wide enough for a single foot, crumbling in places where winter ice had weakened the ancient rock. Don't look down, Cale breathed, but it was impossible not to see the carnage spreading through their homeland like spilled blood soaking into sacred earth. The Bloodstones had brought more than weapons to this fight. They had brought a complete philosophy of conquest that reduced their enemies to nothing more than obstacles to be cleared away. Earthwalker elders, who had lived through 8 decades of accumulated wisdom, were being slaughtered like sick animals. Pregnant women were cut down without mercy, their unborn children dying with them. This wasn't war. This was extinction. Zara reached the overhang first, her hands finding purchase on a loose boulder that jutted out from the cliff, faced like a stone tooth. It was perfectly positioned, heavy enough to crush everything below it, and held in place by nothing more than centuries of accumulated debris. The children, she whispered. We have to time this perfectly, or we'll kill them along with their captors. The lead warrior was entering the final phase of his ritual, his scarred hands tracing increasingly complex patterns, while he chanted in a language that seemed to make the very air grow thick and oppressive. The children's eyes were glazed with terror so complete that they had stopped crying, stopped moving, stopped everything except the automatic function of breathing. When he raises the club for the killing blow, Cale said, That's when his attention will be completely focused downward. That's our moment. But as they waited for their opportunity, a new horror revealed itself in the valley below. The Bloodstones weren't just killing their enemies. They were taking trophies. Hands, heads, hearts cut still beating from open chests. These grisly prizes were being strung on leather cords around the necks of the victorious warriors, each one a symbol of power absorbed from the conquered. The scarred warrior raised his club high above the smallest child's head, his muscles tensing for the final fatal blow. Zara and Cale threw their combined weight against the boulder. For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, nothing happened. The stone held firm, anchored by generations of wind-blown soil and stubborn inertia. Then, with a grinding roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world, it broke free. The massive projectile fell like the judgment of angry gods, crushing the ritual circle in an explosion of dust and scattered bone. The scarred warrior vanished beneath tons of crushing stone, his death scream cut short before it could properly begin. The children, miraculous, unhurt in the narrow space between scattered rocks, looked up with eyes that had seen too much but somehow survived to see more. But their rescue had come at a cost. Every Bloodstone warrior in the valley now knew exactly where the Earthwalker resistance was hiding. War cries erupted from 100 throats as the enemy converged on their position, like iron filings drawn to lodestone. "The back cave," Zara gasped, pointing to a barely visible opening in the cliff face 30 yards away. "If we can reach it before they surround us, ... But even as she spoke, she could see Bloodstone climbers already scaling the opposite cliff, their progress swift and sure. They would reach the cave entrance before any fleeing Earthwalkers could hope to gain sanctuary. The trap was closing with mechanical inevitability. Cale grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to leave bruises. "There's another way," he said, his voice carrying a strange calm that spoke of absolute resolution. "But you won't like it." In the distance, she could hear the approaching thunder of boots on stone as their enemies closed in for the final kill. Cale led her deeper into the cliff face than she had ever ventured, through passages so narrow they had to turn sideways to squeeze through, into chambers that smelled of age and secrets older than memory. The walls here bore paintings that predated the Earthwalker clan by countless generations, primitive figures locked in eternal struggles with beasts that no longer walked the world. "Where are we going?" Zara whispered, but her voice seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive darkness around them. "To the deep place," Cale replied, his words carrying a weight that made her blood run cold. "Where our ancestors made the first pact with the things that live beneath the world." The deep place was legend, nightmare, cautionary tale told to children who stayed too far from the fire's light. According to the stories, it was here that the first Earthwalkers had encountered something that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal, but offered power to those desperate enough to accept its terrible price. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed through the stone corridors, war cries and the scrape of weapons against rock, growing closer with each passing moment. The Bloodstones had found their trail and were following it with the relentless determination of apex predators. The passage opened into a vast cavern that seemed to swallow their torchlight like a hungry mouth. The walls were covered with paintings that told a story too ancient and too horrible for comfortable contemplation. Figures that might have been human worshipping things that definitely weren't. Rituals conducted in pools of what looked disturbingly like blood. And in the center of it all, a presence that seemed to watch from the painted walls with eyes that had never been entirely alive. "The first pact," Cale said, pointing to a series of pictographs that seemed to move in the flickering light. "When the great ice came and drove our ancestors to the edge of extinction, they came here and offered themselves to something that had been sleeping beneath the earth since the world was young." Zara studied the primitive artwork with growing horror. The story it told was clear enough. Starvation, desperation, and finally the willing sacrifice of everything that made them. Human in exchange for the power to survive and conquer their enemies. They became something else, she breathed. Something that could hunt in the darkness, that could kill without mercy, that could ... That could win, Kale finished. The question is, are we desperate enough to make the same choice they did? The sound of bloodstone warriors in the outer passages was growing louder, more focused. They had found the hidden entrance and were beginning their descent into the sacred darkness. In minutes, maybe less, they would reach this chamber and complete their genocidal mission. There has to be another way, Zara said. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were hollow. The Earthwalker clan was finished. Their children were dead or dying. Their elders had been butchered. Their hunting grounds had been claimed by enemies who would use them until nothing remained but barren wasteland. Look around you, Kale said, his voice carrying the bitter edge of absolute truth. This is the other way. This is what our ancestors did when they faced extinction. They chose survival over humanity, power over purity. In the center of the cavern was a natural pool filled with water so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols were carved around its rim, not pictographs like those on the walls, but something far older, far more primitive, as if they had been scratched into the stone by claws rather than tools. The blood of the first sacrifice, Cal explained. Still warm after all these countless generations. Still hungry for the taste of desperate souls. The first bloodstone warriors appeared at the cavern entrance, their torches casting dancing shadows that made the painted figures seem to writhe and twist with malevolent life. Their leader, a scarred veteran whose necklace of enemy fingers rattled with each step, smiled with predatory satisfaction as he spotted his trapped prey. Earthwalkers, he called in their language, the words dripping with contempt. You have led us to your most sacred place. How fitting that you will die here, where your ancestors first learned to grovel before powers they couldn't understand. More warriors poured into the chamber, their weapons gleaming in the torchlight. Zara counted at least 20, with more arriving every moment. Even if she and Kale had been fresh and fully armed, the odds would have been impossible. Choose quickly, the warrior chief continued, his smile widening to reveal teeth filed to sharp points. Die as cowards hiding in the darkness, or die as warriors fighting in the light. Either way, your blood will feed the earth of our new territory. Zara looked at Kale, seeing her own desperation reflected in his eyes. Then she looked at the ancient pool with its carved warnings and its promises of power beyond human understanding. The choice was no choice at all. She stepped toward the dark water, feeling something vast and patient and utterly alien stir in the depths below. A reflection stared back at her from the surface, still recognizably human, still carrying the spark of mercy and compassion that defined her people. For now, what do we have to do? She whispered. Cal's answer came in a voice that no longer sounded entirely his own. Blood calls to blood, Cal intoned, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the stone itself. Life calls to the hunger that sleeps beneath life. We offer ourselves willingly to the darkness that our enemies have forced us to embrace. The pool began to bubble, its surface roiling with movement that came from impossible depths. Whatever lived in those black waters was ancient beyond measure, patient as the turning of seasons and utterly without the moral constraints that defined human existence. Zara felt its attention focus on her like the weight of buried mountains, pressing down on her consciousness with alien curiosity. It whispered without words, communicated without language, offering visions of power that would make the bloodstone warriors look like children playing with sticks. But the price? Images flooded her mind. The fate of those who had accepted this bargain before. Her ancestors, transformed into something that could hunt in absolute darkness, that could track prey across vast distances by scent alone, that could kill with preternatural strength and speed. But the cost had been everything that made them recognizably human. They had become the very monsters that now hunted in the deepest caves, the shadow stalkers that even the Bloodstones feared to encounter. "You hesitate," the Bloodstone chief observed, stepping closer with predatory confidence. "Good. Die with your pathetic humanity intact. It will make your screams more satisfying." His warriors spread out around the cavern, cutting off every possible escape route. Some carried torches. Others bore weapons still wet with Earthwalker blood. All of them wore the expression of apex predators who had cornered their prey and were savoring the moment before the final kill. "The children," Zara whispered to the presence in the pool. "The three we saved, are they still alive?" The response came not in words, but in visions. The rescued children huddled in a small cave, surrounded by Bloodstone hunters who were debating whether to kill them quickly or save them for ritual torture. They had perhaps minutes before the decision was made for them. "Save them," she said aloud. "Whatever the cost, save them." The pool erupted. What rose from the black waters was not quite liquid and not quite solid, but something that existed in the space between states of matter. It poured over the rim like living shadow, flowing across the cavern floor with purposeful intelligence. The Bloodstone warriors' confident expressions transformed into masks of primal terror as they realized they were no longer the apex predators in this equation. Several fired arrows at the approaching darkness, but the projectiles passed through it without effect, clattering harmlessly against the far wall. "What is that?" their chief screamed, his voice cracking with fear. The shadow presence reached the first warrior and flowed over him like a tide of hungry night. His scream lasted exactly 3 seconds before being cut off with surgical precision. When the darkness receded, nothing remained but empty air and a few scattered drops of blood. "Run," the chief bellowed, but his retreat was blocked by the very warriors he had brought to witness his victory. In their panic, they became their own obstacle, stumbling over each other in their desperate attempt to escape the impossible horror they had awakened. The presence consumed them methodically, efficiently, without malice or mercy, simply processing biological material that had served its purpose and was no longer needed. Within moments, the cavern was empty except for Zara, Kale, and the patient darkness that had answered their call. Then it turned its attention to them. "The compact is made," Kale said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. "We offer ourselves freely, knowing the price. What will we become?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer from the ancient paintings surrounding them. The response came as a flood of sensation rather than words. The feeling of muscles that could tear stone, senses that could track a single drop of blood across miles of wilderness, speed that could outpace the swiftest prey. But underneath it all was something else, a hunger that could never be truly satisfied, only temporarily sated. They would become the monsters that haunted the deepest caves, the shadow stalkers that even experienced hunters feared to encounter. They would gain the power to protect what remained of their people, but they would lose the ability to truly live among them. The darkness reached for them with tendrils that felt like cool water and moved like liquid starlight. Zara took Kel's hand as the transformation began, feeling her bones stretch and strengthen. Her muscles cored with inhuman power, her senses expand to encompass reality in ways no human mind was designed to process. The last thing she experienced as a purely human being was the sound of children, S laughter echoing from somewhere high above. The 3 young ones she had saved, now free and safe, thanks to the price she and Kale had chosen to pay. Then the darkness claimed her completely, and when she emerged from the pool minutes later, she was something that had never existed before, a guardian angel with the face of death itself. The real hunt was about to begin. The thing that had been Zara emerged from the black pool with liquid darkness still dripping from her transformed flesh. Her reflection in the water showed features that remained recognizably her own, but refined into something that existed at the intersection of beauty and terror. Her eyes had become pools of starlight, in a face carved from living shadow, and her smile revealed teeth that could part steel as easily as flesh. Beside her, Cal's transformation had taken a different path. Where she had become a creature of elegant lethality, he had evolved into something built for pure destruction. His hands ended in claws that could carve through stone. His shoulders had broadened into a framework capable of supporting muscles that no human skeleton could bear. They were no longer entirely human, but they were still entirely themselves, and they were very, very angry. The children first. Zara's voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate from the cave walls themselves. Then we settled the debt with those who dared to invade our sacred places. They flowed through the stone passages like liquid night, moving with speed that transformed the solid rock corridors into blurs of gray and black. Their enhanced senses painted a detailed picture of the valley above, the locations of every remaining bloodstone warrior, the scent trails of fear and blood and desperate violence that marked the ongoing genocide of their people. The 3 rescued children were exactly where the pool's visions had shown them, cornered in a shallow cave by 4 bloodstone hunters who were engaged in heated debate about the most entertaining method of execution. "Make them last," one was saying as Zara and Cale arrived at the cave mouth. "The chief wants their screams to carry across the valley, to break the spirit of any earthwalkers still hiding." "Too risky," another argued. "Better to kill them quick and get back to the main fight. Something strange is happening down below. Half our raiding party hasn't reported back from the deep caves. They never saw death coming." Zara struck like lightning given form, her claws parting the first hunter's throat before he could draw breath to scream. Cale took the second and third simultaneously, his transformed strength allowing him to crush their skulls together like ripe fruit. The fourth hunter managed to raise his spear, but the weapon shattered against Zara's reinforced ribcage like brittle wood. She lifted him by the throat, studying his terrified face with the detached curiosity of a predator examining unfamiliar prey. "Please, ... he gasped, his eyes reflecting the starlight that now burned in hers. "I have children of my own." "So did we," she replied, and opened his throat with surgical precision. The rescued children stared at their saviors with expressions that mixed gratitude with primal terror. They were safe now, but they would never again sleep peacefully knowing that such beings walked the world. "Go to the high caves," Zara told them gently, her voice carrying the authority of absolute protection. "Tell any survivors you find that the Shadow Guardians have awakened. Tell them to wait until sunrise, then count their dead and begin again." As the children fled toward the safety of the upper passages, Cale moved to the cave entrance and tasted the air with senses that could detect emotional states as clearly as physical sense. 37 bloodstone warriors still alive in the valley, he reported. 23 actively engaged in hunting our people. 14 gathered around their war chief near the central fire, probably planning their next assault. "Which group first?" Zara asked, though they both already knew the answer. "The hunters. Save as many of our people as we can, then deal with the leadership." They descended into the valley like avenging angels carved from living nightmare, moving between shadows with the fluid grace of apex predators who had transcended every natural limitation. The bloodstone hunters focused on tracking down the last pockets of earthwalker resistance, never realized they had become the hunted instead of the hunters. The slaughter was methodical, efficient, and utterly without mercy. A group of 5 warriors cornering an elderly earthwalker couple in their family cave simply vanished one by one, picked off by claws that struck from darkness and retreated before their victims could even scream. Another hunting party, engaged in the systematic torture of captured children, found themselves facing opponents who could move faster than human eyes could track and strike, with force that shattered bones like pottery. With each kill, Zara felt the ancient hunger grow stronger within her, demanding more blood, more fear, more of the life force that sustained her transformed existence. The presence from the pool had not lied about the price of power. She was becoming something that could protect her people, but she was also becoming something that might eventually consume them. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight, there were still enemies to kill. By the time she and Kale reached the central fire where War Chief Grimgor waited with his remaining lieutenants, the Bloodstone invasion force had been reduced from over 60 warriors to less than 20. The survivors huddled around their fire like children afraid of the dark, their weapons ready, but their eyes darting constantly toward the shadows where death might be stalking them. Grimgor himself remained standing, his massive frame silhouetted against the flames like a monument to human brutality. His ritual scars seemed to writhe in the firelight, and his teeth, filed to points in the manner of his people, gleamed like ivory daggers. "Shadow stalkers," he called into the darkness, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any environment. "I know you're out there. I know what you've become. But you're still just 2 against 20. And we've been killing monsters since before your ancestors learned to walk upright." Zara stepped into the firelight, her transformed features casting impossible shadows that seemed to move independently of her body. "You're wrong about the numbers," she said softly. More figures began emerging from the darkness around the fire's perimeter. Earthwalker survivors who had been thought dead, their faces painted with mud and ash in imitation of their shadow guardian protectors. They moved with purpose that spoke of recent training and equipment that gleamed with fresh blood. "We've been busy while you were dying," Kale added, his voice carrying the rumble of distant thunder. "Gathering our scattered people, arming them with weapons taken from your dead, teaching them that mercy is a luxury we can no longer afford." The final battle was about to begin, and this time, the Earthwalkers would not be fighting as victims. War Chief Grimgor raised his bone club high above his head, its surface carved with the names of every enemy he had killed in personal combat. The firelight caught the ritual scars covering his massive frame, each one representing a life taken, a territory claimed, a moment when he had proven himself the superior predator. "Come then, shadow things," he roared. "Let us see if your dark gifts can stand against true warrior skill." The battle erupted with the fury of a summer storm, but it was not the massacre that either side had anticipated. The surviving Bloodstone warriors, hardened by generations of conquest and territorial warfare, fought with the desperate skill of veterans who understood that retreat meant extinction. They formed defensive circles, used their fallen comrades' bodies as shields, and coordinated their attacks with the precision of a military unit. But they were fighting an enemy that no longer played by the rules of human warfare. Zara moved through their ranks like liquid death, her claws parting flesh and bone with surgical precision while her transformed reflexes allowed her to dance between spear thrusts that would have skewered any normal opponent. Each kill fed the ancient hunger within her, making her stronger, faster, more perfectly adapted to the art of ending lives. Kale fought with the methodical efficiency of a natural disaster, his enhanced strength allowing him to shatter weapons, crush armor, and tear through defensive formations like they were made of morning mist. Where Zara was elegant in her lethality, he was simply unstoppable. But the real shock came from the surviving Earthwalkers themselves. These were not the peaceful tree worshippers that the Bloodstones had expected to slaughter. These were people who had watched their children murdered, their elders butchered, their sacred places defiled. They fought with a fury that matched their shadow guardian protectors, showing no mercy to enemies who had shown none to them. Old wounds were being paid back in blood and screaming. Grimgor found himself facing Zara in single combat while the battle raged around them, his massive club whistling through the air in arcs that would have pulverized a normal opponent. But she was no longer normal, and each of his attacks met only empty air as she flowed around his strikes like water around stones. "You're fast," he admitted, breathing heavily from his exertions. "But you're still just flesh and bone underneath all that shadow magic, and flesh can be broken." He feinted left, then spun right with surprising speed for someone of his size, his club connecting solidly with her ribs. The impact would have shattered a human torso, but Zara merely staggered, her transformed physiology absorbing damage that should have been instantly fatal. "My turn," she said, and struck back with claws that carved through his ritual armor like it was made of soft clay. Grimgor staggered, looking down in surprise at the parallel gashes across his chest. Blood seeped through his fingers as he pressed his hands to the wounds, and for the first time since the battle began, Zara saw fear creep into his eyes. "What are you?" he whispered. "Evolution," she replied, and opened his throat with a single elegant gesture. The war chief toppled backward into the fire, his massive body sending sparks cascading into the night sky like dying stars. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading as the last bloodstone warriors fell to Earthwalker spears or Shadow Guardian claws. By dawn, the valley was quiet again. Zara and Kale stood among the scattered bodies of their enemies, their transformed features gradually returning to something more recognizably human as the immediate crisis passed. But the changes went deeper than cosmetics. They could feel the presence from the pool stirring within them, patient and hungry and forever alien to human understanding. "What happens now?" asked one of the surviving Earthwalker elders, an old woman whose grandchildren had been among the first victims of the invasion. "Now we rebuild," Zara said, though she knew the answer was more complicated than those simple words suggested. "We honor our dead, we tend our wounded, and we prepare for the next threat that comes seeking to claim what is ours." "And us?" Kale asked quietly, speaking the question that hung unspoken in the morning air. "What becomes of the Shadow Guardians when there are no more shadows to hunt?" Zara looked around the valley that had been their paradise, now marked forever by blood and fire and the necessity of becoming monsters to protect what they loved. The ancient pool in the deep caves still called to her, promising power beyond imagining in exchange for surrendering more of her humanity with each passing day. "We become what we need to be," she said finally. "Guardians when there are threats to face. Teachers when there are lessons to learn. And if necessary—" She paused, touching the claw marks on her forearms where her transformation had left permanent reminders of the price of power. "If necessary, we become the monsters that keep worse monsters at bay." In the distance, smoke was rising from the western mountains, more refugees fleeing the great drought, more desperate clans seeking new territories to claim. The age of easy abundance was ending, and the time of constant warfare had begun. But this valley, at least, would remain safe, protected by guardians who had sacrificed their humanity to preserve the future of their people, protected by monsters who remembered what it felt like to be human and who would never allow that memory to be destroyed. The sun rose on a world that had changed forever, casting long shadows across the valley floor. And in those shadows, patient and watchful and utterly without mercy, new legends were being born. The age of the Shadow Guardians had begun. In the generations that followed, storytellers would speak of the first great clan war, when the Bloodstones came to claim the Whispering Valley and found themselves facing an enemy that had transcended the limitations of mortal flesh. But they would speak in whispers of those who won that war and the price they paid for victory. Some protectors, they learned, were more dangerous than the threats they guarded against. And some shadows never truly fade away.